Hey everyone, we're outside of my local Dollar Tree. Today we're going to make 3 easy meals. I'm trying to stay within a $10 budget, so fingers crossed that I do that. So come along with me. Whenever I'm on a tight budget, one of my favorite things to make is pasta because it makes so much just with one box. I also wanted to find some veggies for each of these dishes. I chose the broccoli cuts. The Dollar Tree broccoli cuts are actually not as good as I would hope as far as how much they cut off of the stalk and everything, because I did find that there were some wooden parts that they really should have cut off in the processing, but I think that's, I guess, what you get for $1.25, which is kind of interesting because Walmart has it for cheaper. In fact, Walmart has most of these items for cheaper, and I have found that Walmart's broccoli cuts are just a lot higher quality. So if you have a Walmart near you, then that's a good option. But I know that Dollar Tree is what a lot of people only have near them. So that's why I chose Dollar Tree as an option for this video. We're gonna get to cooking. Our first meal is going to be this Meatball Mac and Cheese dish. Now, I saw that the Rotini box says to cook the noodles for 10 minutes and the Cheeto Mac and Cheese box says to cook the noodles for 7 minutes. The noodles in the mac and cheese box were definitely a less curled, thinner noodle, so I understand why they would cook faster, but that's important to know if you are cooking both pastas at the same time. So I actually put my Rotini in and began that cooking process sooner, and then about 3 minutes later I went ahead and put in my Cheeto noodles. If you are trying to stretch one of these box meals or box dinners, a trick that I have found is that there is more sauce and more flavor in the sauce than what you actually get the pasta or rice that comes in the box for. So you would just add another extra cup of rice if you were doing a rice dish, or another cup of pasta if you were doing a pasta dish, and it would stretch that meal just a little bit further and make just a little more. Now that our pasta is done, we're going to go ahead and get started on these meatballs. I did all the meatballs and all the pasta all at the same time because I was making all 3 meals at the same time. So you're going to dump your meatballs into this dish. And I went ahead and drained the pasta water as well. I reserved the pasta water because there's some good starch in there that's going to help thicken up our sauces for all of our pasta coating sauces. So I went ahead and drained that in a separate container, and then I did add some ice water, some cold water to the pasta to help it to stop cooking. If you let it just sit there, it will all turn into a big clump, and also the pasta will end up overcooking and kind of disintegrating in your dish, which you do not want. So I am taking these meatballs and we are cutting them up with my handy dandy scissors, which I love using. And I know if you've been watching my videos for a while, you've seen how much I use scissors on a daily basis. But we are cutting these meatballs into fourths to help stretch this meat a little bit further. Meat is the one thing that I find is really difficult to include if you're on a budget. However, I am not as big of a fan of beans, so I have tried to keep those to a minimum. I do enjoy the occasional bean, but I like my meat, and my husband likes his meat too, so that's what we go for. I went ahead and added in a tablespoon of butter because I was seeing that the meat itself is just not extremely juicy, I guess would be the best word, but I went ahead and added in the butter. That really helped the meat to brown these meatballs. And now we're just going to cook the meatballs, stirring frequently until they are thoroughly browned and fully cooked through. I guess they were already cooked, but fully warmed up, I guess. Once we've gotten to that point, I went ahead and reserved about half of it aside because I was wanting to save half of it for the next recipe we're going to be making. And in case you were wondering, each of the packages has 10 meatballs in it. Now that our meat is thoroughly browned, we're going to add in a cup of that pasta water. The starch in it just really helps the sauce to thicken up. We're also going to be adding in our cheese packet from that Cheetos Mac and Cheese. This was a really bold, cheesy flavor, just like the packet said. And don't be afraid if it's a little bit watery at the beginning. It really does thicken up as you cook it down. You're going to be cooking it about 5 minutes, so it's definitely going to thicken up and boil down a little bit and become a much thicker sauce. Since I did not have milk on hand, and I know I could have gotten some from Dollar Tree, but I just didn't have it in the $10 budget, and honestly we are on a pretty tight budget ourselves. So the milk that was in the fridge had gone bad, which is a shame, but I added in 2 tablespoons of the Prego mix to substitute for the milk that was missing, and I honestly don't miss it in the dish, so I felt like that was a pretty good substitute. And I think that the Prego has a little bit of like a garlic flavor in it, which is really good in this dish. Now we're just gonna add in about a cup of our broccoli cuts, and I added it in and then chopped it as it was starting to soften and steam. That really worked out pretty well. I used my scissors, of course, to slice it up more and chop it up smaller. I find that the smaller you chop in the things that you are adding into a dish, the more it makes you feel like you weren't skimping, because you get still a little bit of everything in each bite. We are now adding in 5 cups of that rotini pasta, and we're going to give it a good stir. Our sauce has thickened up and the pasta is going to get thoroughly coated with that sauce. As we cook it up, it's going to cook for 1 more minute, so that's why in the instructions that I have put in the description box, I have said to just cook the pasta, at least the rotini, for only 9 minutes instead of the full 10, because I figured this last minute it would be cooking 1 more minute, and I didn't want the pasta to overcook if you all are trying any of these recipes. Then I added in just a dash of pepper, and I didn't feel like it needed any salt, so I didn't add any more salt to this, but that's also because I salted the noodles. Now we're transferring it into a dish. You could put it in the freezer, and you could freeze this actually and then thaw it out and bake it another time. We ate it that day, so I didn't end up needing to do that, but you could do that. All the ingredients in this should be pretty freezer friendly, and it would make a good easy meal for during the week. I also wanted to add just a little bit of extra flavor, extra richness to the dish, so I put in about 1/4 of a cup of shredded cheddar cheese on top. That really helped add that little extra richness to the dish. Now, if you were wanting to add different spices to this, you could add a little Cajun seasoning or a little bit of garlic powder and onion powder just to ramp up the different flavors in this dish. I tried to stick to just using salt and pepper and the butter for this challenge, but if you were wanting to make it a little different than how I was making it, those would be some really good additions. And here we have our finished dish. This was so delicious and cheesy. My husband didn't care for the meatballs, I will say, but he also is not normally a fan of any kind of meatballs, including homemade meatballs. I do like meatballs, so I felt like this was a pretty good addition to the dish. Next, we're making this Alfredo Rotini. I started out by heating up my pan and adding a tablespoon of butter just to start the browning and melting process. Then I sliced up about 3 slices of this diced deli ham. I diced it using my kitchen shears, of course, and then I stirred it around until it all got browned thoroughly. I wanted this to kind of mimic bacon, even though we didn't get bacon in the end. I know Dollar Tree does sell it, but when I was looking at the protein count on the back, it felt like the ham was going to be a much better value as far as how much protein you were going to get for your $1.25. Then I added in the chopped up meatballs and about half of the can of Prego, which was about 1/2 of a cup. I also went ahead and added in a cup of the pasta sauce. I cut this back in the recipe to 1/2 a cup because I felt like it became a little bit more watery than even the cooking down process allowed. So I went ahead and cut that down. So 1/2 a cup of pasta water, and then I went ahead and added in again another heaping cup of our broccoli, which I then cut up again with my scissors. I let this sauce thicken up and I added in about a teaspoon of pepper. I like a good amount of pepper in mine, so if you aren't quite as much of a pepper fan, then maybe a half a teaspoon would be more to your preference. Then I also added in about a half a cup of the cheese into the mix. I gave this all a good stir and I let the sauce thicken up. It took about 5 to 8 minutes to thicken up. Then I went ahead and added in 5 cups of the rotini. I actually did have a cup or 2 left of the rotini at the end of this, and I just added it into each of the dishes, a little bit extra pasta. You could also add a little salt on it and just have a salted pasta option, but this made a lot of food, so I didn't even realize how much pasta it was going to make when I was making that whole box. But it makes a ton of food, and it had enough food for my husband and I really for the whole week, and I took it to work, and it made a really filling lunch for several days after this. I went ahead and added a little more salt and pepper, as you saw, and gave it one final mix, and this dish is done. I went ahead and transferred it into one of those little pans again. These pans I got from the Dollar Tree. They come in a 2-pack for $1.25, and each of them have a little lid that you can write on top what is inside the dish. They're really convenient if you are only feeding about 2 people. It fits about 2 people's servings inside of the dish, and this is what our final dish looks like, this Alfredo Rotini pasta. It was really good with the added ham in it, and the broccoli made a nice green addition, a nice pop of color. Next up, we're making this Cordon Bleu gnocchi. I'm adding some salt to our water, and we're going to go ahead and boil up our gnocchi. The back of the package says once the water is boiling to add in all the gnocchi and just to wait until they pop up to the surface. When they are on the surface of the boiling water, you know they're done. I went ahead and added in the whole package. The whole package kind of sticks together a little bit, so I used my spoon then to stir it up and kind of break them up a little bit so that they wouldn't end up cooking in one big clump. These cook really quickly, so if you're in need of a fast budget-friendly meal option, this one's definitely it. As you can see, the gnocchi are all on the surface, so I went ahead and drained the dish and added in the rest of my broccoli. It was about another cup. Then I added in all of my cheese. I really should have shredded it, but I just added it in one giant clump and it took a while to melt down. So I would recommend shredding it or cutting it into smaller chunks. Then I also added in the rest of my ham. It was about 5 slices. This ham added a nice little pop of color to the dish as well as a good flavor. Next, I added in the rest of that can of Prego sauce. It was about a half a cup of sauce left. I also know that when you're on a budget, you are trying to get every last bit of the sauce out of this jar. This is my trick. I normally take some of whatever I'm cooking, stick it in the jar and stir it around. That helps you to get all the sauce out of that jar without watering down your sauce or whatever you're cooking with adding more water or liquid into the jar and shaking it. Now I gave everything a good mix. This turned out really creamy and very rich. Now we're going to transfer it again to one of our little containers. This made a fair amount of food. This made enough for 3 meals actually. My husband had some, I had some for a meal, and then I also had some after cooking it, and it was a really good dish. It reheated pretty well. I did add a little bit of water when I was reheating it because as the gnocchi sit in the sauce, they're going to thicken that sauce up so that it's very thick. So if you are putting it in the fridge and then trying to reheat it later, don't be afraid to add a couple tablespoons of water just to help it to make that sauce liquidy again. And the ham was such a good addition to this dish. The ham was so pretty, and I just like the pink color with the green of the broccoli. And then as far as the taste goes, I felt like it tasted better the next day because the salt is really able to get soaked up in the gnocchi. If you eat it straight from here, the gnocchi is a little bland inside even though we put salt in the water. just because it hasn't had a chance to soak up the sauce and the salt. So if you want to reheat this, it's actually one of those dishes that's going to be better the next day, and it was really good. This was very delicious. My favorite of all the meals. Thanks again for watching. I will see you on the next one.